you heard of the toxic triangle? Well, if you haven't, you may want to watch this because while we always point out to the toxic leader in the room, the reality is there are followers and there's also the environment that enable them to continue their antics. So if you want to know whether you're part of the problem or perhaps what can be done about it, stay tuned. Well, welcome back to this week's episode of On the Love of Leadership. Focus is often on the destructive leader, but it's really about their followers and the environment and how that enables them to continue being what they are. In case you haven't heard, there's this concept called the toxic triangle. It's described in an article by Padilla, Hogan, and Kaiser, and there's a link down below for that article. I highly recommend you read it. The triangle consists of three main points or contributors to the toxic workplace. There's the leader themselves, there's all of the followers, and of course the environment. So let's go over the toxic triangle in a little more detail. As with any triangle, there are three sides to it. And in the first top circle here, we're going to go a little bit more into detail into what this means. So at the very top, we have the destructive leader. The destructive leader is highly charismatic. They can have a need for enhanced personal power, be narcissistic in nature, have a negative sort of history or background. They may have a perspective that everyone is to be taken advantage of, and they use divide and conquer tactics. This next circle speaks to the followers themselves. In the article, they call them susceptible followers, and there are two kinds of followers. According to the article, these are the conformers, those that have unmet needs, low core self-evaluation, or low maturity. So these might be your less experienced, less confident employees. Then you have the colluders. They're the ambitious type, the ones that have very similar worldviews to the toxic leader, some misaligned values, and definitely have a lack of an ethical compass. And they're willing to follow that destructive leader into the fire because it benefits them. And finally, we have the conducive environment, which usually is an unstable environment where there are a number of perceived threats, a lack of aligned values, and there are a lack of checks and balances to keep people in line. So while the leader is often the focus of our attention, we really cannot absolve ourselves because we're a part of that machinery that enables those leaders to thrive in these circumstances. So as a follower, do you follow one of those categories that I just showed you in the triangle? And if not, then what do you do? And what if the environment itself is enabling the leader? Then what? So the article down below alludes to a few key things that can help minimize the tactics that these leaders can take. One is they suggest that you reinforce collaboration and employee initiative. So one of the things that these toxic and destructive leaders often do is they really don't promote collaboration because they want to be authoritarian in their approach and they don't want anyone to have a say in what they do and how they respond to things. So they will not want people to collaborate or have any kind of employee initiative. So one of the countermeasures to that is to encourage a highly collaborative environment where the employee initiative and involvement of the employees helps to maintain the balance and control of authority. Another area that this article talks about is in the leadership development space. So these kinds of toxic leaders typically don't want to grow other leaders. They see them as competition, not as adjuncts or as a good thing, for example, in their organization. So it's suggested in the article is that the organization start to encourage leadership development and actually promote people based on positive leadership behaviors, not just on whether they meet certain metrics in the organization. And the last thing that this article sort of alludes to is the notion that we have to have enough checks and balances in the organization to ensure that these authoritarian sort of / toxic, narcissistic type leaders are kept in check. So here's the thing about the article. It's very research driven, which is great. However, again, it's a good resource and I'm going to recommend you look at it. But from a practical sense, if you're an employee or a middle manager and you have these issues, like how do you manage this stuff? How do you deal with this? So in a really toxic environment, it might be that you don't have much of a choice but to look somewhere else for a position or a job, because ultimately, if you don't have a lot of influence or if you don't think you can have any kind of impact or there doesn't seem to be any real hope for things to change and the toxicity is kind of at all levels and all leadership, then it may be time to start thinking about shifting your career. However, I am going to say that if you love your work, you love your colleagues, and you really do enjoy the clients that you work with, you may want to start doing a bit of an assessment to see what you can do as a leader within your organization. Because remember, leadership is all about relationship. It's not about position. Here are a few tactics that you can maybe consider before shifting careers. To me, it always comes down to what I like to call my CIA factors, right? And it really is about what do you control? What do you influence? And what are you completely absent of control and influence? So it's really important that you look at these three factors before you make any decisions around your career. What do you control? Well, the first thing you start with is you control your own behavior. So do an assessment. If you're the one as an employee, are you enabling this behavior? Are you yourself one of those followers within the circle of the triangle that talks about whether you're an implicit part of the problem? If you are a part of the problem, then you start with yourself and you start changing your behaviors and start influencing those around you through your modeling of the way, if you will. What do you influence? So, do you influence a governing body of the organization in some manner? You have a relationship with somebody on the board, or maybe you know the CEO really well, or maybe you are in tight with the ethics commissioner for the organization. Like, do you have influence somewhere that can help to sway the narrative in your direction or in the direction of the team of people that want to see change in the organization? And then the last piece is, what are you absent in terms of control or influence? So is the negativity in the culture and the environment so toxic, so bad, so through and through, there's no ethics, there's no values, everything that the company says they do, they don't do, then I think at that point you have to start making decisions around whether you stay or you leave. Another tactic is you could seek out allies. I've kind of alluded to this already in the previous part where I talked about where do you have influence. What influence do you have? What allies do you have? Do you have a group of employees that are willing to all stand up at the same time and push back on the nonsense that you're seeing in your organization? Or are you standing solo? Because that makes a big difference. If you're standing solo, you might just get picked off and fired. But if you have a whole bunch of people, an entire team, and you kind of rally the troops, for lack of better words, then you have a better chance of making some significant organizational change. And I want to say that I did this in an overarching, very hierarchical, bureaucratic environment where there's lots of rules and lots of things you have to do and not do, etc. And there was toxicity at the time that I was leading this particular organization that I'm referring to. I was able to still make significant cultural changes within our organization. So as a leader, I was able to increase the engagement. I was able to increase people's desire to be a part of the whole. And I was able to increase communication and trust. So there are things you can do at the micro level within your own team, within your own organization, within your own branch or what have you, where you can make significantly positive changes and make your life a lot better. The last thing I'm going to say is perhaps review the values and ethics of your organization. So a lot of organizations have ethics and values codes. Government of Canada, for example, has values codes and ethics codes. You need to look at those and get real clear about how this leader is not following those codes and those ethics policies of the organization. And if you have the courage to do so, I would encourage you to point out that they're not actually following the company's policies on these things and really insist that the leader follow those rules around code and ethics. Again, this might take courage because the perception of being career limited is real. You might get fired if you go against a leader. So again, that comes back to your allies piece. You need to be sure that you're not doing this all by yourself, right? You want to combine and have a level of effort that makes it such that you are not just the solo person complaining in the room every 5 minutes, but in fact, there's a group of people behind you that are willing to stand up with you. But I'm just going to say, at the end of the day, when it comes to really toxic environments and toxic leadership, it's going to be up to you to assess for yourself what you're willing to tolerate or not tolerate, whether there's too much risk or it seems too stressful, or maybe, you just worry that you're going to get your butt fired. At the end of the day, you have to do what's right for you. Me as an online coach can't tell you what to do in this circumstance. If you're surviving in a very toxic environment, and a lot of us are right now, the reality is that no one online is going to be able to tell you what is right for you, and you have to figure that out. But one thing I'm going to say is don't let fear keep you, one, from shifting your careers if that's something you think you need to do for yourself. And the second thing I'm going to say is don't let fear keep you from standing up for yourself either, because the last thing you deserve is to be abused, no matter who it's coming from. Thanks again for being here this week. I do appreciate you taking the time, and I just want to remind you that while toxic leadership does stem often from the leader themselves, and they do need to be course corrected, the reality is there are other contributing factors in an organization, which include the followers themselves that enable these people to behave the way they do. Dictators don't become dictators on their own. They become dictators because they have the right followers and in the right environment to actually be able to do what they want to do. So if you're working in an environment where it feels like that, then you need to find your allies, you need to gain your courage, find your voice, and worst case scenario, pack your stuff and check out. If you like this kind of content, make sure you subscribe to this channel because it really does help spread the message out to other people who might be wanting and needing this message. And if you yourself are looking for courage to either shift or pivot your career, or you're looking to advance in your career, something I really do well with people. So if you want, just book a 30-minute with me. There's a link down below for that. And I also have a free leadership self-assessment down below. Click on the link. It's completely free and it'll give you a bit of a snapshot of the behaviors where you know you have strengths and maybe some areas where you might want to work a little bit. There's also some suggestions on the last page on how you can improve those skills. Thanks again for being here. Until next week, take care.